Disney's live-action remake of its first-ever movie, Snow White, did not live up to expectations, and there are plenty of factors at play. Here are some of the reasons nobody's whistling about these box office returns.
You know, I really don't remember you being this opinionated.
Disney announced that Mark Webb would take the helm as the director of the live-action Snow White remake in May 2019, and it came to consume nearly the next 6 years of his life. Webb's lengthy commitment to the project speaks to a larger problem: endless delays. Once set to start shooting in July 2020, COVID-19 prevented Snow White from starting filming until March 2022. An original March 2024 release date vanished amid the Hollywood strikes of 2023, thus ensuring it wouldn't arrive until March 2025. The film had so much build-up that people seemingly got tired of waiting for it. There were less than 3 years between Disney announcing the Lion King remake and its July 2019 release. The first casting announcements for the Lilo & Stitch remake were made just 2 years prior to its planned May 2025 debut. Rachel Zegler was cast as Snow White a whopping 4 years before she appeared as the iconic Disney princess on the big screen, so things took a lot longer than other Disney projects. Those delays were partially inescapable thanks to external factors Disney couldn't control, but maneuvers like releasing a controversial image of the CG Dwarfs 17 months before the film's debut just let toxicity stew around the film for what felt like eons. A tighter schedule could have kept Snow White from exhausting moviegoers before a single ticket had been sold. Snow White had a very high hill to climb from the start because of the massive size of its budget. Even the film's initial budget of around $210 million was significantly higher than the $160 million that 2017's Beauty and the Beast cost, and that one had way bigger stars in its cast. But the budget of Snow White ballooned to $269 million. To be truly profitable, it needs to gross more than $500 million, and only 2 of Disney's live-action remakes have achieved that: The Lion King and Beauty and the Beast. Snow White has come nowhere close, taking in only $42.2 million over its opening weekend. Even Marvel movies, which for the longest time were guaranteed moneymakers for Disney, have been failing to reach the heights they once did. Plus, billion-dollar blockbusters are becoming more rare in general. To break even for the Mouse House, Snow White would have had to reach Dune Part 2 numbers. Considering all these metrics, it's really not surprising that Snow White isn't proving profitable. There were unquestionably many aspects of the film's execution that alienated moviegoers, but the staggeringly miscalculated budget meant the odds of box office glory were even more slim. When the Aladdin remake hit in 2019, it was the first major theatrical Aladdin movie in ages. Ditto for Beauty and the Beast in 2017. 21st century audiences didn't need to wait for Disney's 2025 update to see Snow White on the big screen though. In 2012, Mirror Mirror and Snow White and the Huntsman famously went head-to-head as 2 very different takes on the classic tale. The latter film's mythology continued in 2016's The Huntsman: Winter's War. There's been no shortage of Snow White material on the big screen in the last decade. Just none of it came from Disney. The existence of those films took away some of the specialness of Mark Webb's Snow White, especially since this new movie only marketed itself as being a take on the 1937 original.
The original Snow White, it didn't break the mold, it created the mold.
Heck, Disney's Snow White even incorporated elements reminiscent of those 2 2012 films, including the critical use of 7 bandits and a sequence of the 7 dwarfs sneaking into the Queen's castle. Snow White may be the fairest of them all, but she wasn't especially distinctive to 2025 moviegoers. With the exception of Beauty and the Beast, the typical casting mold for these live-action Disney remakes is to cast an unknown actor in the lead role, and then get a massive box office draw in the supporting cast. The pattern's been firmly established. Snow White had one half of that execution with Rachel Zegler taking on the title role. Unfortunately, the producers opted to pick Gal Gadot to be the film's marquee star, which was a grave miscalculation.
Please. You were saying...
Since the first Wonder Woman, Gadot hasn't headlined a live-action theatrical release that's made more than $50 million. It isn't proven that she's bankable on her own merits. Gadot's cinematic exploits since 2017's Wonder Woman have included largely derided flicks like Red Notice, Heart of Stone, and Wonder Woman 1984. Lending her name to Snow White didn't give the film an extra layer of prestige or any box office prowess. It was just another aspect of the remake that mostly just elicited shrugs from moviegoers. Hiring someone with a middling box office track record like Gadot in a key Snow White role didn't fit the mold that Disney has otherwise strictly adhered to for these remakes. If any needed a big star to boost its profile, it was surely this one. 2023's The Little Mermaid opened to an impressive $117.5 million over the 4-day Memorial Day weekend, but it still ended up coming in at a loss. This came on the back of Dumbo and Cruella failing to make box office waves. Mulan also garnered shrugs and controversy in the general public, and on Disney+, Peter Pan and Wendy and Pinocchio didn't exactly set the world alight. At this point, it seems pretty clear that the bloom is off the rose when it comes to Disney reimagining classic characters and stories in live action. Is the problem that these live-action Disney movies are getting worse, or is it that the shine has worn off and audiences are simply fatigued? In truth, it's likely a bit of both. The fact is that Snow White feels obligatory and run-of-the-mill in 2025, whereas 10 years ago, something like Cinderella felt like an event audiences had to see. With this reality becoming inescapable, Snow White couldn't even lean on the Disney brand name to help mitigate its box office woes. Toxic audience reception can sink a feature. Some genres are better at surviving a poor cinema score grade than others though. Horror movies, for instance, can prove leggy even if they get cinema score marks as low as a D+. More mainstream, audience-friendly genres though tend to need something in the A range, or else there's trouble afoot. That's definitely the case with family movies like Snow White, which shouldn't contain any material that leads audiences to leave the theater feeling like handing out C's and D's. Over its opening weekend, Snow White scored a B+ cinema score grade. That doesn't sound so bad, but pretty much every other live-action Disney remake has scored in the A range. While women and viewers under 18 gave Snow White an A-, men in the audience dragged its score down, potentially as a result of some of the political discussion surrounding the movie's casting choices. There was a lot riding on this score Snow White got, given the troubled nature of the production, and it made clear that Snow White wasn't going to bounce back from all the controversy and blow everyone away at the box office. With word of mouth mostly being blah, it's no wonder opening weekend projections for Snow White kept decreasing. Across the reviews for Snow White, the one positive aspect that everyone agrees on is that Rachel Zegler gives the role her all. This talented performer who strutted her stuff in 2021's West Side Story has received universal praise for both her singing chops and her compelling on-screen presence. However, not even this gifted performer could make audiences care about a Disney princess that's never had much of a fanbase.
Where is Snow White?
Snow who?
A lot has been written about Snow White as a character, with many critics pointing out that she's devoid of any personality in the original Disney animation. The late great film critic Roger Ebert once said, "If Walt Disney's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs had been primarily about Snow White, it might have been forgotten soon after its 1937 premiere, and treasured today only for historical reasons, as the first full-length animated feature in color. Snow White is, truth to tell, a bit of a bore, not a character who acts, but one whose mere existence inspires others to act." Since the original 1937 version, most of Disney's marketing surrounding Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs has focused on Doc, Grumpy, Dopey, and the other dwarfs. Just look at that Seven Dwarfs Mine Train roller coaster that's been entertaining Disney theme park attendees for years now. There's also the animated kids show spin-off, the 7D from the mid-2010s, which further solidified the Mouse House's larger interest in the supporting characters over Snow White herself. Snow White has never cultivated a fanbase on par with later Disney princesses, and this was a critical problem not even Rachel Zegler could solve. In general, remakes of films from Disney's famed Renaissance era fare better than remakes of the Mouse House's earlier animated movies. Exceptions do exist, as evidenced by The Jungle Book and Alice in Wonderland. However, the huge successes of Aladdin, The Lion King, and Beauty and the Beast indicate that there's more appetite for the Disney of the 1990s than previous decades. Even Disney seemed to realize that remakes of earlier titles weren't exactly printing money as 21st century movie events. Hence, Lady and the Tramp, Peter Pan and Wendy, and Pinocchio all being sent to Disney+.
Wouldn't want that on my conscience.
This isn't necessarily a reflection of audiences detesting all old movies. Instead, it merely captures how kids who grew up on 90s Disney titles are now parents looking to have a nostalgia-fueled movie theater trip with their kids. Plus, 90s Disney movies and their catchy songs like Be Our Guest or Hakuna Matata have never left pop culture, whereas the music from older Disney movies don't quite slap in the same way. Though its endless release date delays kept Snow White in the online discourse machine for way too long, actual marketing from Walt Disney Pictures was weirdly muted, especially very close to the film's release. Other live-action Disney remakes arrived in theaters with a tidal wave of promotional tie-ins and ads. For instance, in 2016, The Jungle Book debuted its big theatrical trailer during the Super Bowl.
Trust in me.
3 years later, Aladdin debuted a major trailer at the Grammys, and in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, The Little Mermaid arrived in theaters with a marketing blitz that included a trailer premiering during the Oscars. Snow White, on the other hand, didn't receive anywhere near as notable a marketing push. Leading up to its release, articles even appeared questioning where all the merchandise for this tentpole was. Meanwhile, major TV events in February 2025, like the Grammys and Super Bowl, came and went without any special Snow White commercials. Just a weird decision all around for Disney to not market it to the fullest extent like they usually do with other releases. From the moment Snow White was announced, discussions about how on earth this production would handle a modern incarnation of the Seven Dwarfs overshadowed almost everything else. Stars with dwarfism were quick to voice their opinions. Jackass alum Jason Weeman Acuna didn't agree with Disney's approach to the remake, and Game of Thrones veteran Peter Dinklage said that he found it insulting that Disney would still use these characters. After noting on Mark Maron's WTF podcast that Disney did make a legit progressive decision by casting a Latina actress to play Snow White, he said,
"But you're still making that backward story of
about
7 dwarves living in a cave. What the are you doing, man?"
Disney seemingly took Peter Dinklage's Snow White criticism to heart, releasing a statement soon afterward. A spokesperson said, "To avoid reinforcing stereotypes from the original animated film, we are taking a different approach with these 7 characters and have been consulting with members of the dwarfism community." Perhaps unsurprisingly, the fact that Disney opted to render the dwarfs using CGI caused yet more negative conversation. Execs clearly took note of this, because the 7 characters were almost totally absent from the film's posters, with only their silhouettes visible in the background. Beyond that, the dwarf character designs became a go-to punching bag online, and the fact that all but one of them were voiced by non-dwarf actors only made things even worse. Yeah, the whole approach was just a spectacular failure. 2025's domestic box office landscape has been nothing short of dismal, and it definitely didn't help Snow White. You might be thinking, surely the fact that other films have bombed in 2025 left the door open for Snow White to swoop in and scoop up a fortune. Nope. The fact is that success tends to breed success when it comes to the Hollywood box office, with big movies fueling others. Just look at the whole Barbenheimer phenomenon from 2023. Of course, it's doubtful that a bunch of massive 2025 productions would have suddenly given Snow White a $100 million plus domestic opening weekend, but still, showing trailers for Snow White before films that audiences were flocking to see could have helped drum up a little more interest, right? Yeah, in the end, it might just be that it was released in March. We all know they generally save the best movies for the latter part of the year, or at least the summer.